One afternoon of planting. Food for the rest of your life. Not a garden you replant every spring. Trees. Go in the ground one. Produce for decades, sometimes generations. The oldest food-producing trees in history are still alive, still producing. Some have fed the same families for 200 years. Modern gardening didn't forget this. It replaced it. A tree that feeds you for 50 years is a terrible business model. You buy it once. Never come back. The nursery industry, the seed industry, the fertilizer industry, they profit from resetting to zero every spring. Not from permanence. They needed you to think annual. You almost did. 20 trees that break the cycle. Number 11 has fed European civilizations for 500 years from the same tree. Number 1 preceded agriculture itself. Cultivated thousands of years before wheat. Let's grow something that outlives us. Number 20, Moringa. Folk healers in northern India called it the drumstick tree. In the Philippines, it is malunggay. In parts of sub-Saharan Africa, it is called the mother's best friend because nursing mothers have eaten its leaves for generations to support their own nutrition and milk production. 3 separate ancient cultures on 3 separate continents with no historical contact. At the time they developed their traditions, all arrived at the same conclusion about the same tree. It was essential. Life-sustaining. The tree planted closest to the house because you needed it within reach. The historical record stretches back 4,000 years. Ancient Egyptian texts reference moringa oil used in skincare and religious ceremony. Roman soldiers reportedly carried moringa preparations on long campaigns for energy and endurance. Ayurvedic medical texts, over 2,000 years old, list it among the most important medicinal food plants in existence, prescribed for over 300 conditions. Modern analysis confirms every traditional claim in laboratory terms. Moringa leaves contain 7 times the vitamin C of oranges, 4 times the calcium of milk, 4 times the vitamin A of carrots, 2 times the protein of yogurt, and 3 times the potassium of bananas. Those are not marketing claims. Those are laboratory measurements repeated across multiple independent studies by unconnected research groups. The productive advantage over conventional food trees is the speed and mechanism of harvest. Moringa, grown as a coppiced shrub, cut back repeatedly to keep it accessible, produces fresh leaf growth continuously throughout the growing season. No pollination required, no fruit set required, no waiting for seasonal timing. Cut it, it regrows. Within weeks, every time, for as long as the root lives. This is not a supplement. This is a tree you can walk outside and harvest every week. In the tropical and subtropical zones where it thrives outdoors, a single established moringa tree provides leafy green protein for a family indefinitely. In temperate climates, it grows successfully in large pots brought indoors for winter, or as a warm season annual that can be cut back repeatedly through the growing months. It disappeared from Western horticulture because it requires warmth and was never integrated into the temperate-focused gardening culture that dominates English-language nurseries and garden books. 3 ancient civilizations understood what it was. 1 modern food system ignored it entirely. Think of it as the tree that 3 ancient civilizations on 3 continents independently called essential, growing in a pot on your warm patio, waiting to be recognized. Number 19, Cornelian cherry. Archaeological evidence from sites across southeastern Europe and the Near East places Cornelian cherry in human diet from the Neolithic period onward. It was food before farming was a concept, gathered from wild trees before anyone had the idea of planting them deliberately. Greek and Roman writers documented it as a common food fruit. Homer mentions it in the Odyssey. It appears in classical Roman agricultural texts alongside figs, apples, and pears, with the familiarity of something every reader recognized. The fruit is small, olive-shaped, brilliant scarlet when ripe, with a flavor combining tartness and sweetness that has been described as somewhere between sour cherry, cranberry, and pomegranate. The vitamin C content is extraordinary, among the highest of any fruit grown in temperate climates. Antioxidant levels exceed blueberries significantly. Iron content is among the highest of any fresh fruit. In traditional Turkish and Azerbaijani cuisine, it appears in jams, sauces, cold drinks, and fermented preparations because it has never stopped being a valued food in the cultures that maintained the tradition. Georgian mountain communities still make a fruit leather called taklapi that has been a winter nutrition staple for centuries. The tree is among the most reliable fruiting trees for temperate gardens. It tolerates shade, dry conditions, and alkaline soil. It flowers in late winter, one of the earliest ornamental trees to bloom, providing critical early pollen for bees when no other food source is available. It produces fruit consistently, year after year for well over 100 years. It disappeared from mainstream Western horticulture because its fruit is small, sour, and entirely unsuited to the commercial fresh fruit market. Every property that makes it valuable in a home garden eliminates it from commercial consideration. The stone fruit Homer ate. That feeds itself in shade and poor soil that has been producing from the same tree for a century in documented cases. Still producing. Still ignored by the food system that replaced it. Number 18, Seabuckthorn. Seabuckthorn grows wild along the coastlines of Europe, China, Mongolia, and Russia on sand dunes and cliff edges that most other fruiting plants refuse to inhabit. Tibetan monks used it medicinally for over 1,000 years, documenting it in Tibetan medical texts for lung complaints, digestive disorders, and strengthening the body against cold. Mongolian folk medicine used it for wounds and as a winter food supplement. Russian folk medicine used the seed oil topically for burns. Russian space programs gave cosmonauts Seabuckthorn oil to protect their skin and mucous membranes from radiation exposure during missions. Multiple traditional systems across the Northern Hemisphere arrived at consistent conclusions independently. When unconnected cultures reach the same conclusions about the same plant over centuries, the conclusion is worth taking seriously. Modern nutritional analysis placed Seabuckthorn among the most nutrient-dense fruits ever measured. The berries contain more vitamin C than any other commonly eaten fruit, between 4 and 15 times the concentration of oranges per gram, depending on cultivar. Vitamin E content is exceptional. The seed and pulp oils contain rare omega-7 fatty acids, with documented effects on skin health and metabolic regulation. Beta-carotene concentration is among the highest of any fruit. The productive capacity in difficult conditions is the other remarkable feature. Seabuckthorn fixes atmospheric nitrogen through root bacteria, improving every soil it grows in. It tolerates salt spray, sand, drought, and temperature extremes that kill most food trees. It spreads by root suckers to form a colony that stabilizes difficult ground. A Seabuckthorn planting is not a tree. It is a slow-growing fortress of nutrition rooted in ground nothing else wanted. It disappeared from mainstream cultivation, partly because of the harvesting challenge. The berries are small and tightly clustered on thorny branches, and partly because the extreme tartness of the raw fruit requires processing or blending before most people find it palatable. Every obstacle is real. None of them eliminate the value of the plant. The vitamin C bomb that nature planted on every coastline and mountain range in the Northern Hemisphere, and then put thorns on to keep you honest. Number 17, Elderberry. Hippocrates called the elder tree his medicine chest in the 5th century BCE. Dioscorides documented it in his 1st century herbal. Every significant European herbal from the medieval period includes elder as a primary plant. Indigenous peoples of North America used native elderberry species in ways that parallel the European tradition precisely, despite developing those uses independently. Sambucus nigra grows rapidly from cuttings or self-sown seed, reaching productive size within 3 years. A single established elder produces hundreds of flower heads in June for cordial, fritters, and fragrant flavoring, followed in August and September by large drooping clusters of deep black berries. Multiple clinical trials have confirmed elderberry preparations reduce the duration and severity of influenza. A meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials concluded that elderberry substantially reduced upper respiratory symptoms. The mechanism involves anthocyanins that directly inhibit viral replication and stimulate immune response. The folk tradition of reaching for elderberry at the first sign of winter illness has laboratory confirmation at every level. The tree feeds wildlife simultaneously. Elderflowers support dozens of insect species in early summer when few other nectar sources are available. The berries feed blackbirds, starlings, and thrushes in large numbers in autumn. One tree, medicine for you, food for them. The kind of biological efficiency that the modern garden industry somehow forgot to sell. One important note, cooked berries are safe and nutritious. Raw berries cause nausea in quantity. The leaf and bark are not food. This is worth saying clearly because the elderberry is one of those plants that rewards knowledge and punishes carelessness. It disappeared from deliberate planting because it grows so readily from self-sown seed that it appears uninvited wherever birds eat berries. A tree that plants itself is not a product anyone can sell, which is exactly the pattern this entire list is built around. Think of it as the 3-year investment that pays with flowers in June and immune medicine in September for the next 30 years. Number 16, Quince. Quince was once the most prized fruit in Europe. Before sugar was available as a preserving agent, quince was invaluable because it contains exceptionally high levels of pectin, the natural gelling agent, allowing it to be preserved with minimal added sweetener. Every significant European kitchen garden from the medieval period through the 18th century grew quince. It appears in Roman agricultural texts as a primary orchard fruit. It appears in Shakespeare with the familiarity of something every reader recognized. The ancient record goes further. Quince appears in Greek mythology as the golden apple of the Hesperides. Some historians argue the apple in the Garden of Eden was more likely a quince than what we now call an apple. The fruit that has been misidentified in one of the most famous stories in Western civilization is still growing in gardens, still being ignored. The fruit cannot be eaten raw. In an era when fruit is expected to be eaten directly from the tree, a fruit that requires cooking has no commercial future. But cooked quince is extraordinary. It turns from pale yellow to deep rose red, from astringent to fragrant and honey sweet, producing a flavor complexity that cooked apples and pears cannot approach. Membrillo, the Spanish quince paste, served with aged cheese. Quince jelly, the original marmalade, derived from the Portuguese marmelo, which was quince before it was citrus. The quince tree is remarkably forgiving. It tolerates wet soils that apple and pear cannot survive. It tolerates moderate shade. It is self-fertile. It fruits reliably in years when other top fruit fails due to late frost or disease. A mature quince lives for over 100 years. A fruit that required heat to reveal its extraordinary flavor was abandoned by a culture that lost the patience to cook. Number 15. Carob. Ancient Greeks called it the bread of the poor. Roman soldiers carried carob pods as campaign rations because they were calorie-dense, shelf-stable, and required no preparation. Carob was the locust bean that John the Baptist ate in the wilderness, according to biblical tradition. It sustained communities across the Mediterranean through every siege, famine, and crop failure for millennia. When grain failed, carob kept people alive. Carob pods are high in natural sugars, up to 50% by dry weight, making them among the sweetest naturally occurring foods. They contain significant calcium, more per gram than milk, protein, B vitamins, and minerals. The pods are also high in fiber and tannins that historically gave carob a mild anti-diarrheal effect, making them useful in communities where gastrointestinal illness was a recurring problem. Modern chocolate substitutes based on carob powder exist for people who cannot tolerate caffeine or theobromine. The original use was simpler: ground pods, baked bread. The tree is among the most drought-tolerant large food trees available. In its native Mediterranean range, it grows on rocky hillsides with minimal rainfall, producing reliable pod crops from trees that live for several hundred years. The root system goes deep. It fixes atmospheric nitrogen through specialized root associations. It is among the few large food trees that genuinely improves the soil it grows in over decades. It disappeared from Northern European and North American food tree planting because it requires heat to produce reliably, and its food tradition belongs to Mediterranean and Middle Eastern cultures. The English-speaking garden world has consistently underrepresented. Think of it as the chocolate tree Roman soldiers carried into battle, growing on dry hillsides for 300 years and asking only for warmth and sun. Number 14. Pomegranate. Archaeological evidence places pomegranate cultivation in the ancient Near East over 5,000 years ago. It appears on Egyptian tomb walls as a symbol of eternal renewal. Prescribed as a rejuvenating tonic across every major ancient civilization: Greek, Persian, Roman, Jewish, Islamic. Every Mediterranean culture that could grow it did. The Persian Empire carried it east. The Arab trade routes carried it west. By the time it reached Spain in the medieval period, it had been a sacred fruit for thousands of years already. The nutritional density is significant. High vitamin C, vitamin K, folate, potassium, polyphenols including punicalagins and L-gitannins, with more antioxidant activity per serving than red wine or green tea. But the real story is what happens in the gut. The fruit produces urolithin, precursors that gut bacteria convert into compounds that activate mitophagy, clearing damaged mitochondria from human cells. Research published in Nature Medicine confirmed urolithin A improved mitochondrial function in aging human muscle tissue in a randomized controlled trial, the first natural compound demonstrated to activate mitophagy clinically. in a fruit ancient civilizations already considered sacred. Cold hardy varieties produce reliably across the southern United States, the Mediterranean, and warm temperate zones worldwide. The tree lives for over 200 years. Some documented specimens in the Middle East are over 400 years old and still producing. The tree that Greek myth associated with the underworld turns out to reverse cellular aging at the subcellular level. Ancient observation meeting modern measurement at exactly the same conclusion. The mythological fruit of eternal renewal. That turned out to renew cells at exactly the subcellular level nobody ancient had a word for. Number 13. Medlar. Medlar, Mespilus germanica, is the original slow food. The fruit is harvested in November, after the first frosts, then set aside for 2 to 4 weeks in a process called bledding. During bledding, the hard, astringent flesh softens and transforms into something with the texture of smooth apple butter and a flavor described as a combination of cinnamon, brown sugar, and wine. It cannot be rushed. It cannot be eaten before it is ready. The process is unique among European fruits. Medlar appears in Chaucer, in Shakespeare, where it is mentioned multiple times with the familiarity of a fruit everyone recognized. Roman agricultural writers documented it as a cultivated orchard fruit. Medieval monastery gardens grew it as a standard component of the kitchen orchard, alongside apple, pear, and quince. For 1,000 years, Medlar was as familiar to European households as apples are today. The tree itself is beautiful, compact, gnarled, with twisted branches that make it one of the most structurally interesting trees in a winter garden. White flowers in late spring, orange and red autumn color. Fruit hanging on bare branches after leaf fall. Dark brown and photogenic in a way most modern fruit trees never achieve. It requires no spray program, no significant pest or disease affects it in most temperate climates. It fruits reliably year after year from the same tree for well over a century. It needs no pollinator. It tolerates partial shade and most soil types. Everything about the plant is forgiving. Everything about it is long-term. Everything about it is exactly the kind of food tree. Modern horticulture cannot sell easily. It disappeared from modern orchards because the commercial fresh fruit system has no template for a fruit that must be left to decompose slightly before eating. Supermarket logistics cannot accommodate a 3-week waiting period between harvest and consumption. The fruit that Chaucer ate is still available to anyone willing to wait 3 weeks for it. Think of it as the fruit that Shakespeare ate. That requires nothing except the willingness to wait 3 weeks before eating it. Number 12. Loquat. Loquat flowers in autumn and ripens its fruit in late winter and early spring, producing precisely when the temperate fruit calendar is otherwise empty. No apple, no pear, no cherry is producing fresh fruit in February in a temperate garden. Loquat is. In mild temperate climates, including southern England, coastal California, the Mediterranean, and much of coastal Australia, Loquat produces reliably enough to be a genuine winter food source. Chinese records of Loquat cultivation extend over 1,000 years. Japanese cultivation is equally ancient. Spanish missionaries introduced it to California in the 18th century, where it naturalized in coastal gardens, and continues to produce fruit that most California residents do not know is edible. That is a remarkable detail. A tree growing in tens of thousands of California gardens, dropping fruit on sidewalks every spring, and the people who live beside it have no idea they're walking past food. The fruit is small, orange-yellow, with a delicate flavor combining peach, apricot, and citrus. High in beta-carotene, vitamin A, potassium, and B vitamins, eaten fresh or preserved as jam, syrup, or fruit wine across cultures with a longer loquat tradition than English-speaking gardeners have had it. The tree itself is attractive year-round. Large, glossy, dark green leaves, fragrant cream flowers in autumn, orange fruit clusters in late winter, compact enough for small gardens, tolerant of coastal conditions, self-fertile. Everything about the tree makes it an ideal small garden food producer in mild climates. It disappeared from Western food tree lists because it requires mild winters to fruit reliably, and was dismissed as too tender for general temperate cultivation without adequate trial in the genuinely mild temperate zones where it performs well. Think of it as the tree that fills the gap when every other fruit tree in the garden has gone dormant, producing fresh fruit in the months when fresh fruit should be impossible. Number 11. Serviceberry. The Cree, the Ojibwe, the Lakota, and dozens of other nations dried serviceberries in large quantities for winter food storage, incorporating them into pemmican, the concentrated trail food that sustained communities through the harshest months of the northern winter. The Lewis and Clark expedition documented serviceberries extensively as a food source during their crossing of North America. Early European settlers adopted them rapidly because the flavor and abundance earned a permanent place in settler food culture before industrial food replaced the tradition. The fruit ripens in June on most cultivated forms, before almost any other tree fruit of the season, filling a gap in the annual harvest calendar that no other tree crop occupies. Strawberries have usually just finished. Cherries are coming. Nothing else is ready, except serviceberry. The flavor has been described as a combination of blueberry, apple, and almond, with a sweetness that intensifies in full sun and a slight marzipan note from the seeds that distinguishes it from any other fruit. Anyone who has eaten a handful of ripe serviceberries fresh from the tree remembers the experience. Commercial blueberry cannot match it. Nutritionally, serviceberries contain anthocyanins comparable to blueberry, iron in quantities unusual for a fruit, calcium, and vitamin C. Research has ranked them among the most antioxidant-rich fruits available in temperate North America. Higher total antioxidant capacity than most cultivated berries. The tree grows in shade or sun, wet soil or dry, acid or neutral conditions, exposed or sheltered positions. The spring blossom is among the most beautiful of any fruiting tree. Autumn color is outstanding. A tree that does everything, every season, every year, for decades. It disappeared from mainstream nursery stock as a food tree because the commercial berry industry standardized on blueberries, and serviceberry was reclassified as an ornamental. The fruit is still there. The classification is the only thing that changed. Think of it as the berry tree that fed indigenous North America through every winter for thousands of years, producing the first fruit of summer in a gap where no other tree produces anything. If you're still watching, you're already thinking differently than 99% of gardeners. Because this is where the model breaks. This is where the annual mindset starts to feel absurd. Hit like if you're with me. Subscribe if you haven't yet. Number 10. Date palm. Archaeological evidence of date palm cultivation in the Persian Gulf region dates back 6,000 years. Mesopotamian records document extensive palm grove management. Ancient Egyptian texts treat date palm as a primary agricultural resource. The Quran mentions dates more than any other fruit. Every civilization that emerged in arid zones from North Africa through the Middle East to South Asia either built itself around date palm or traded extensively for its fruit. A single palm in full production can yield over 100 kilograms of dates per year. Let that settle for a moment. 100 kilograms from a single trunk every year for as long as the tree lives. The fruit contains up to 80% sugars by dry weight, making it one of the most calorie-dense foods produced by any plant. Significant potassium, magnesium, copper, manganese, and B vitamins. High fiber content that moderates glucose release despite the sugar concentration. In arid climates, the date palm is not merely a food tree, it is infrastructure. The fronds provide building material and thatching. The fiber provides rope and textiles. The wood provides timber. The pits can be ground into animal feed. Ancient communities calculated their wealth, partly in date palm groves, the way European communities calculated it in cattle herds. Owning palms was owning life itself. Fruit production requires the combination of long, hot, dry summers and mild winters that limits reliable cropping to Mediterranean climates. The American Southwest, parts of Australia, and South Africa. For gardeners in those climates, a date palm is one of the most productive long-term investments available. The tree establishes slowly. The tree lives for over a century, and while it lives, it pours out calories the way a well pours out water. Think of it as the tree around which entire civilizations organize their survival, still producing 100 kilograms of food per year from a single trunk. Number 9. Ginkgo. Ginkgo biloba is the oldest tree species on Earth in continuous existence. The fossil record places it in its current form 200 million years ago. It survived every mass extinction since then, including the one that killed the dinosaurs. It has been continuously cultivated in China and Japan for at least 3,000 years, maintained in temple gardens when it disappeared from the wild. Every ginkgo alive today descends from trees maintained in cultivation by human communities who valued them too much to allow them to disappear. The nut, produced by female trees, has been eaten in China and Japan as a food for over 1,000 years, appearing in Chinese culinary texts from the Song dynasty as an ingredient in congee and as a roasted snack. In Japanese cuisine, ginkgo nuts appear in chawanmushi, the savory egg custard, served at formal meals. The taste is distinctive, slightly bitter, slightly sweet, with a texture between chestnut and potato. Modern pharmacological research on ginkgo leaf extract has generated one of the largest research bodies of any botanical medicine. Compounds including ginkgolides and bilobalide have documented effects on circulation and cognitive function in multiple clinical trials. One caution: raw ginkgo nuts contain a compound that blocks vitamin B6 and causes vomiting in large quantities. Cooking neutralizes it. Roasted or cooked nuts eaten in moderate quantities are safe and nutritious, which is exactly how they have been consumed for over 1,000 years. Female trees produce nuts. Most street trees are male, eliminating the food crop. For nut production, a female tree must be specifically sourced. That detail disappears from conversation because municipalities plant males exclusively to avoid the fleshy seed coat that some people find unpleasant. The food crop was eliminated by urban design. Think of it as the tree that survived 200 million years of planetary catastrophe and is now producing food in monastery gardens, while most people walk past it on the way to buy supplements made from its leaves. Number 8. Persimmon. Persimmon leaves drop in autumn, leaving the tree bare, and the fruit hangs on the branches like orange lanterns through November and into December. The image of persimmon fruit on bare winter branches is one of the iconic images of Japanese autumn. In China, persimmon cultivation dates back over 2,000 years. Korean traditional food culture uses both fresh and dried persimmon extensively. Indigenous peoples of Eastern North America ate the Native American persimmon, dried them for winter food, and fermented them into a traditional beer. Non-astringent varieties can be eaten firm like an apple. For cold climate cultivation, Diospyros virginiana, the American persimmon, offers cold hardiness the Asian varieties cannot match. Persimmon contains more beta-carotene than most fruits, significant vitamin C, vitamin A, manganese, and a fiber type with documented cholesterol-lowering effects. The fruit that decorates its own tree in winter, like orange lanterns, ripening long after every other fruit has been picked and eaten. Number 7. Chestnut. In Corsica, Sardinia, the Italian Apennines, the Cevennes of France, and mountain villages of Spain and Portugal, chestnut was not a luxury. It was the primary carbohydrate source for communities where grain agriculture was impossible on steep, rocky terrain. The chestnut harvest was the harvest. The Romans spread chestnut cultivation throughout their empire. Many of the oldest chestnut trees in European forests are Roman-era plantings. A mature chestnut tree produces a large annual nut crop with minimal management. The harvest occurs naturally as the nuts fall from their spiny cases in October. Chestnuts are unique among nuts, low in fat and high in complex carbohydrates, more similar nutritionally to whole grain than to other nuts. Vitamin C, B vitamins, potassium. Trees don't scale fast, they scale forever. A chestnut is that principle in its purest form. Plant once, feed villages for centuries. Number 6. Hazel. Archaeological evidence from the Mesolithic period, over 8,000 years ago, shows hazelnuts as a primary food source for hunter-gatherer communities across Europe. One site in Scotland contained the remains of thousands of hazelnut shells, suggesting that processing hazelnuts was a major subsistence activity for the community. Hazel coppicing, cutting the tree to the ground every 7 to 10 years, simultaneously maintained the nut crop and produced straight poles for construction. The coppiced stool is effectively immortal. Hazel stools over 1,000 years old are still producing in managed coppice woodlands across Britain. One plant, food, building material, wildlife habitat, for 1,000 years from the same root. The nuts are high in healthy fats, protein, vitamin E, magnesium, and B vitamins. They store well through winter without any processing. It disappeared from deliberate food planting, partly because squirrels harvest the nuts before they ripen in many gardens, and partly because the commercial hazelnut industry supplies cheap processed nuts that removed the perceived need to grow your own. Number 5. Olive. Documented olive trees over 2,000 years old are still producing fruit in the Mediterranean. Let that settle for a moment. The same trees that produced oil for Roman households produce oil for contemporary households today. No other food tree offers that generational continuity at that scale. Archaeological evidence of olive cultivation in the eastern Mediterranean dates back over 6,000 years. Every civilization that touched the Mediterranean world organized part of its economy around olives. Cold-hardy varieties, including Arbequina and Cornucopia, tolerate temperatures down to -10 degrees Celsius with protection and have produced fruit in sheltered positions in southern England, coastal California, and parts of the Pacific Northwest. Olive fruit contains monounsaturated fats, vitamin E, and polyphenols including oleuropein with extensively documented anti-inflammatory and cardiovascular protective effects. The problem isn't food, it's time. The olive tree was humanity's first answer to that problem, and it still works. Number 4. Heritage apples. The apple originated in the wild forests of Kazakhstan. Roman legions spread apple cultivation across their empire. By the 18th and 19th centuries, thousands of named varieties existed across the British Isles, France, and North America, each with distinct flavor characteristics, ripening times, and uses. That diversity collapsed in the 20th century. The commercial fresh fruit industry required consistency, shelf life, and transport tolerance. Hundreds of varieties were abandoned. Cox's Orange Pippin from the early 19th century has aromatic richness that modern commercial varieties do not approach. Ribston Pippin contains vitamin C at 3 to 4 times the levels of commercial varieties. A small orchard of 3 or 4 trees selected to ripen in sequence from August through October, with late keepers lasting into January, provides fresh fruit from summer through midwinter without any storage technology. It disappeared through the commercial logic of uniformity. That is a loss that home orchard planting can individually undo. Number 3. Walnut. Archaeological evidence of walnut consumption in France dates back 60,000 years, placing walnut in the diet of Neanderthals. The tree grows slowly in its first decade, establishing a root system before committing to rapid above-ground growth. At 10 years, it begins producing nuts in meaningful quantities. At 100 years, it is a mature specimen. A full-grown family cannot harvest alone in a single day. Walnuts contain alpha-linolenic acid, the plant-based omega-3, in quantities higher than any other commonly eaten nut. Over 100 clinical trials on walnuts and cardiovascular health have been conducted, making walnut one of the most clinically studied foods in existence. An established walnut produces several kilograms of nuts annually, reaching 50 kilograms or more from a mature specimen. The nuts store for over a year in cool, dry conditions. This is not your tree. This is your grandchildren's tree. Number 2. Mulberry. Chinese records of mulberry cultivation extend over 4,000 years. King James I of England planted mulberry trees at Buckingham Palace in the early 17th century. Some of those trees are still alive, still producing, still the same trees planted in the 17th century. The fruit of the black mulberry is exceptional, deeply flavored, intensely sweet, with a flavor concentration that stains hands, lips, and clothing permanently. High in resveratrol, the compound found in red wine and associated with cardiovascular protection, iron, vitamin K, anthocyanins, with documented antioxidant activity. But the fruit is not the reason mulberry sits at number 2. Continuity is. A mulberry planted today will produce meaningful fruit within 5 years. Within 20 years, it becomes a major feature of the garden. Within 50 years, it becomes the defining feature. Within 100 years, it becomes a historical monument. A mulberry is the rare tree where grandparents, parents, and children genuinely harvest from the same plant, at the same time, from the same branches. The fruit is too fragile to ship commercially. It can only be eaten at source, which means the tree is not a product. It is a place, a permanent fixed location where this specific fruit exists in the world. Plant one mulberry, give it 50 years, leave it to the next generation, repeat for another century. That is what the rest of this list has been circling around. A tree that is not a harvest, but a heritage. And number 1, fig. 11,000 years ago, before any grain was cultivated, before any animal was domesticated, before any agricultural system existed, someone in the Jordan Valley selected a fig tree with superior fruit, took cuttings from it, and planted those cuttings deliberately. That person was doing something that had no precedent in human history, choosing to invest in a future they might not live to see, thinking in tree time rather than season time, planting something for permanence. The first cultivated food tree in human history was the fig, before wheat, before barley, before legumes, before agriculture existed as a concept. The fig appears in the Bible more times than any other fruit. It appears in the Quran, in Homer, in Plato, in classical Roman agricultural literature. Every Mediterranean civilization treated the fig as a staple rather than a luxury. A fig tree planted today in a warm, sheltered position will produce its first meaningful crop in 3 to 5 years, full production in 10. A well-situated fig tree produces reliably for over 200 years. In the Mediterranean, trees 400 and 500 years old are still in production. In Britain, the oldest documented cultivated fig at Tarring in West Sussex is over 500 years old and still producing. The fig is not one food among many. It is the oldest continuous food relationship between a tree and a human community in the history of our species. In practical terms, a fig tree planted by a gardener in their 40s will still be producing fruit for their grandchildren. A fig tree planted now will feed people who are not yet born from the same root, without anyone replanting it, without anyone preparing the bed, without anyone purchasing seed. The 45-minute investment of planting it correctly in the right position is the last significant effort the tree will ever require. Plant it in a warm, sheltered position. Restrict the root run with paving or buried barriers to encourage fruiting. Choose a variety suited to your climate. Water it in the first 2 summers. Then leave it alone for the rest of your life and for the lives of the people who come after you. Most people plant vegetables and start over every year. A fig tree ends that cycle permanently. Think of it as the tree that preceded agriculture, that fed 11 civilizations, that grows from rock, that asks for almost nothing, and that has been waiting 11,000 years for you to plant it. 20 trees, everyone capable of producing food for longer than any annual crop, any vegetable bed, any supermarket loyalty card, most of them capable of producing for longer than you will live. The modern food system built itself around annual cycles, because annual cycles generate annual purchases. The entire model depends on starting over. A tree that feeds your family for 200 years is a product you buy once. The industry has no business model for that kind of permanence. The question is not whether you have space. The question is whether you are still thinking in seasons, or finally thinking in decades. If this changed how you see what is growing around you, click the video on the left, because in that one, we look at the plants that turn the worst soil in any garden into the most productive corner. Subscribe to Plantelligence, and I will see you there. Now, go plant something that will still be producing when you are not.